finely tuned. So improbability is added to improbability, until our minds are reeling in incomprehensible numbers. There is no physical reason why these constants and quantities have the values they do. The one-time agnostic physicist Paul Davies comments, "Through my scientific work, I have come to believe more and more strongly that the physical universe is put together with an ingenuity so astonishing that I cannot accept it merely as a brute fact." Similarly, Fred Hoyle remarks, "A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics." And Robert Jastrow, the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, has called this the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. So once again, the view that theists have always held, that there is an intelligent designer of the cosmos, seems to make much more sense than the atheistic view that the universe, when it popped into being, uncaused, out of nothing, just happened to be, by chance, fine-tuned to an incomprehensible precision for the existence and evolution of intelligent life. We can summarize this second argument as follows. Premise 1, the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe is due to either law, chance, or design. 2, it is not due to law or chance. 3, therefore, it is due to design. Number 3, objective moral values in the world. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Many theists and atheists alike concur on this point. For example, Michael Roos, a noted philosopher of science, explains, "The position of the modern evolutionist is that morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, 'Love thy neighbor as thyself,' they think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory." Friedrich Nietzsche, the great atheist who proclaimed the death of God, understood that the death of God meant the destruction of all meaning and value in life. I think that Friedrich Nietzsche was right. But we've got to be very careful here. The question here is not, must we believe in God in order to live moral lives? I'm not claiming that we must. Nor is the question, can we recognize objective moral values without believing in God? I certainly think that we can. Rather, the question is, if God does not exist, do objective moral values exist? Like Professor Roos, I just don't see any reason to think that in the absence of God, the herd morality evolved by Homo sapiens is objective. And here Dr. Pigliucci agrees. He says, and I quote, "I agree with Dr. Roos. There is no such thing as objective morality. Morality in human cultures has evolved, and what is moral for you might not be moral for the guy next door, and certainly is not moral for the guy across the ocean." On the atheistic view, some actions, say rape, may not be socially advantageous. And so in the course of human development, it has become taboo. But that does absolutely nothing to prove that rape is really wrong. On the atheistic view, there's nothing really wrong with your raping someone. Thus, without God, there is no absolute right and wrong that imposes itself on our conscience. But the problem is that objective values do exist, and deep down, I think we all know it. There's no more reason to deny the objective reality of moral values than the objective reality of the physical world. Actions like rape, torture, and child abuse aren't just socially unacceptable behavior. They're moral abominations. Professor Roos himself admits the man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as wrong as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Some things, at least, are really wrong. Similarly, love. equality, self-sacrifice are really good. Thus, we can summarize this third argument as follows. Premise 1, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Premise 2, objective values do exist, from which it follows logically and inescapably. 3, therefore, God exists. Number 4, the historical facts concerning the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, was a remarkable individual. New Testament critics have reached something of a consensus that the historical Jesus came on the scene with an unprecedented sense of divine authority, the authority to stand and speak in God's place. He claimed that in himself the kingdom of God had come, and as visible demonstrations of this, he carried out a ministry of miracle working and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands, and thus evidence for the existence of God. Now, most people would think that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just accept by faith, or not. But there are actually 3 established historical facts recognized by the majority of New Testament historians today, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact number 1. On the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian scholar who has specialized in the study of the resurrection, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. According to D.H. Van Dalen, it is extremely difficult to object to the empty tomb on historical grounds. Those who deny it do so on the basis of theological or philosophical assumptions. Fact number 2. On separate occasions, different individuals and groups of people saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic of Vanderbilt University, Gert Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number 3. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. You see, Jews had no belief in a dying, much less rising, Messiah. And Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anybody's rising from the dead before the end of the world. Nevertheless, the original disciples suddenly came to believe so strongly that God had raised Jesus from the dead that they were willing to die for the truth of that belief. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar from Emory University, muses, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, that is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. Attempts to explain away these 3 great facts, like the disciples stole the body or Jesus wasn't really dead, have been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. The simple fact is that there just is no plausible naturalistic explanation of these facts. Therefore, it seems to me the Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that entails that God exists. Finally, number 5, the immediate experience of God. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by immediately experiencing Him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, God was known to them as a dynamic will, interacting with their own wills, a sheer, given reality, as inescapably to be reckoned with as destructive storm and life-giving sunshine. To them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experiential reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is the case, then there's a real danger that arguments for the existence of God could actually distract our attention from God Himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make His existence evident to you. The Bible promises, draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. We mustn't so concentrate on the external arguments that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. So, in conclusion then, we've yet to see any arguments that God does not exist, and we have seen 5 reasons to think that God does exist. And together these constitute a powerful cumulative case for the existence of God. Now, if Dr. Pigliucci wants us to believe atheism instead, then he's got to first tear down all 5 of the reasons that I presented for God's existence, and then in its place erect a case of his own to show that God does not exist. And unless and until he does that, then I think we can agree that theism is the more plausible worldview.
Not too much. We don't want to put everybody to sleep too early. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and especially to the organizers for organizing this lively debate. I hope that we're all going to be learning something tonight from it. As Dr. Craig said, I will examine his 5 arguments in sequence, and I will try to make a point that they're actually not that convincing. In fact, they're not convincing at all. And then we'll get probably during the rebuttal time to what kind of positive arguments are possible or even needed on the other side of the debate. So my basic thesis is this. While I don't know the truth, and neither does Dr. Craig, neither of us really know what's going on here, it is beyond reasonable doubt, I think, that the Christian God is a result of the human imagination. Notice that I'm talking about the Christian God in particular and not of any concept of God. Dr. Craig spent quite a bit of time talking about generalized versions of God. This was not the topic of the debate, but I knew he was going to do that. So here's argument number 1 that he presented, the origin of the universe. Well, as you will see, I'll dispatch of the first 2 arguments very quickly here, and then we'll probably get to this in the rebuttal anyway. But the first argument is that the universe probably originated, my counter-argument is that the universe probably did originate by naturalistic means. After all, Big Bang and superstrings theory in physics are in fact theories, naturalistic theories that explain the origin of the universe. And they don't require, contrary to what Craig seems to think, as a default hypothesis, any other agency. But the point is that even if the universe were in fact created by a God, there would be no guarantee that there would be the particular Christian God that we're talking about here tonight. Any number of different gods would be able to make that kind of universe, and therefore this is really not an argument at all. It's completely irrelevant to the existence of the Christian God, as much as it is relevant to a more general debate like the one that we had about 3 years ago in Tennessee. The second point was that complexity of the universe. Well, the problem here is the same. It certainly is true that the universe is complex. It is also true that there are perfectly good naturalistic explanations for the complexity of the universe. There is such an entire field of research that is called complexity theory, of how things become more complex. And of course, within biological organisms, there is the theory of evolution by natural selection that explains how organisms can become more and more complex. But again, the problem is by the way, that's a diagram of an eye to show you an example of complexity.